interesting episode on the mindful living where we explore practices and perspectives that nourish our body, mind, and spirit. I'm your Sana as always, and listeners, today's conversation, it feels like, personally for me, invitation to deepen into resilience, awareness, and then healing. Our guest today, Hans Hageman, is not only a Princeton and Columbia Law School graduate, but also a community leader, breathwork practitioner, and also true advocate for trauma-informed healing. Now, let me share a bit about Hans with all of you. From founding schools for underserved children in Harlem and Kenya to creating groundbreaking wellness programs in prisons, Hans has walked a path of service and transformation alike. And today, for you, we'll be diving into the world of somatic awareness, anti-fragility, and also trauma-informed mindfulness, and how these powerful tools can actually help us grow stronger through adversities. We'll also explore what it really means to become an ancestor worth remembering. So let's quickly dive deep into this beautiful conversation. So, Hans, welcome to the show, and it is such an honor to have you with us.
It's an honor to be here as a guest. Thank you very much.
Okay, Hans, I mean, intro. I was just going through your intro, and you have touched so many lives out there. You have had your journey of transformation, and then you are also helping others, especially the underserved children, helping them. So you have walked literally many paths from law to education to wellness. So, how exactly somatic awareness became a central part of your journey?
All the paths I've taken and the tools that I have for healing started out with figuring out how to perform my own healing, and so I was kind of the test dummy, if you will, for a lot of these practices, and
Mhm.
I noticed their benefits to me, and I was trying to figure out. Yes, I'm working with populations that were in need of healing, but why was I choosing the tools that I was choosing? Because there are those more traditional forms of therapy which have their benefits, but for some people they just don't work. So in the early 90s, I became certified as an Ashtanga yoga teacher by a guy named David Swenson, who, at least in North America, is one of the OGs in Ashtanga yoga. And I brought that practice both to the students I worked with, but I also suggested to my staff and faculty that they also participate, both as an example to the young people we were working with, but I also knew that there would be some benefits to them. And what came about wasn't just their physical improvement, but they would say things like they were breathing better. The fact that they had reduced their lower back pain meant that they could be more productive. And so I continued to look for modalities like that, whether it was neuro-linguistic programming, which was, again, more in the cognitive realm, but then also breath work, where I have several certifications, and studying through people like Bessel van der Kolk, who talks about the body holds the score, so that there's more and more research indicating that our experiences live on in our bodies, in our nervous system, in our physiology. And for some people, that's okay. For others, it's not. And there is no awareness of what that is. This these tools and this path also helped me when I moved from the practice of law, because as a young child I just knew I was going to be a lawyer, and I accomplished that. But
Mhm.
then I moved into nonprofit work and youth work, and I felt a tremendous loss there. And it was my somatic practices and things like hypnosis and other things that helped me understand why I felt the way I did when I moved from law to nonprofit work. I had friends who, well, and I now use that term loosely with some of these people, who would
Mhm.
not return my phone calls once I left the practice of law. They had
Mhm.
crafted an identity for me that I took on for myself. And when I left the world of law and the practice of law, there was a certain amount of grief and grieving. And my somatic practices helped me to move beyond that. Um, when and at the another extreme in terms of working with other populations,
Mm-hmm.
I did work at a maximum security prison in New York State with
Okay.
teenage boys who had been convicted of what are termed extremely violent crimes, and
Mm-hmm.
extreme enough so that they were tried in adult court, not youth court, and they were sent to this institution. And to get to these young men, I mean, you saw the pain that these young men were feeling, and they had to put up a stoic front, both because of what people view as the male image, but also because they were trying to survive. So I needed to
Mm-hmm.
create an environment for them where they could also grieve in the way that I was grieving my identity, that the identity of being tough guys could also be put aside and wouldn't impact in a negative way their masculinity, that there was a softer side to their masculine energy, and that's something that they needed to embrace.
Wow. Wow. And you know, thanks for sharing that, Hans. But I really, what strikes me the most is you have extracted the experiences, and you have integrated the body-based practices into environments like prisons and schools. Because these are some of the places where trauma can feel so entrenched, and sometimes highly stressed out. So this is something really very inspiring for me as well, and I hope for all the listeners out there also. And Hans, you have mentioned this concept of anti fragility, how systems of people, they grow stronger through stress. So, how do you see this showing up in the communities you are working with, especially those who are, uh, facing systemic adversity, or they're ostracized in some or the other way?
Well, I saw early on, and I come from those communities, and I've lived
Mhm.
in those communities most of my
Mhm.
life.
Mhm.
And while in certain circles, it hasn't been popular for me to express, but the equation, or not the equation, but the comparison of the oppressor and the oppressed, and only landing on one of those two sides, you're either one or the other, never served the people that I was working with. That there needed to be some sense of agency, some sense of the ability to do things even in the face of, and they're in the midst of obstacles. And
Mhm.
anti-fragility is a part of that, right? So you have things that are fragile, and so you
Mhm.
drop them literally or metaphorically, and they break. Things that are resilient, you drop them, and they nothing happens, or they bounce back to their original form. For anti-fragility, it means to me that you're taking on the obstacles and the pain and the challenges that life presents you, and you've made the decision to come back even stronger. And you can't do that, in my experience, just through mind-based or cognitive-based practices. That kind of a transition, that kind of an awareness, that kind of decision to move through the world in an anti-fragile way needs to encompass the mind, body, emotions, and spiritual aspects of the human being. And I mean, I've worked with young kids in so many different places, in Kenya, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
in girls in Lucknow, India, um, in people in Harlem, in the Mississippi Delta, which in the United States is the poorest in many ways region of the United States.
Mhm.
And so for me to give them a more analytical, intellectual sense of societal's ills is not helpful to those people. They need and want to know that they have the ability to rise above their circumstances, regardless of the impediments that have been there throughout their history or their family's history. And a lot of these traumas, and there's more research coming out about how a lot of these traumas are multi-generational. And if they're
Mhm.
multi-generational, then it means you can't cognitively address them. That there has to be more to it, because
Mhm.
those lessons, that pain is living again in our cells, in our soul, and anti-fragility, and just even if just pretending that one can be anti-fragile is going to get, in my experience, someone a lot farther along than just trying to teach them to be resilient. There's this saying that pain is mandatory, but suffering is optional. That's also a part of the anti-fragility mindset.
That is really powerful, really powerful. Also, Hans, let's talk about trauma-informed mindfulness. I think this is such a powerful framework. So, in your experience, I would love to know this. How exactly does it differ from traditional mindfulness practices? Because let's say through mindfulness, we work on addressing our ingrained trauma, subconsciously, um, clouding our judgment, clouding what we can see in the present moment, especially when you are working with individuals who have faced significant trauma.
Well, so I've been in situations where I haven't exactly, when I've been going through my own mindfulness practice, and I've been
Mhm.
doing it since the 90s. There were times where the person leading the mindfulness instruction, something felt a little off, and I never understood what it was. And only recently, over the last few years, have people come to take a look at trauma informed mindfulness. And
Mhm.
when somebody decides that they want to engage in a mindfulness practice, too often the people leading the sessions or the training don't take into account things like chronic stress,
Mhm.
PTSD, um, the anxiety, dissociation. They don't take into account things like what's now being called internal family systems, and the
Mhm.
different parts of us that exist, all for our benefit in those parts minds, but not all that work the best for the environments that we find ourselves in. So people need, in a trauma informed mindfulness setting, people need to feel safe. They need to feel that the environment is non-coercive. Um,
Mhm.
they need to see that they have a choice. So something as simple as y- just inviting people to close their eyes. They don't have to close their eyes. They don't
Yeah.
have to lay down on the floor if they don't feel safe doing that. They can be in a particular space or setting within the room that makes them feel comfortable. I have a nonprofit called Carencia Leadership, and Carencia, Ernest Hemingway, the author, talked about the concept of carencia, and that being a part of the bull ring, where in a bullfight, the bull moves to that part of the ring where it knows that no matter what is going on outside that part, it's still safe in that carencia, that place of calm. And so that's what you want in a trauma informed setting. So you make people aware of their body. You let them know that it's safe, that it's not a coercive setting. You provide people with choice and control. You make sure that people remain grounded and give them techniques for anchoring and grounding, such as the warmth of their body in a place where they're laying down or sitting, their feet anchored, feeling anchored to the floor, making them aware of their body, focusing on neutral or pleasant sensations, such as the
Mhm.
forehead cool, stomach warm, hands on their laps, noticing the texture. Um,
Mhm.
and you give small manageable doses of awareness. You Whether it's in breath work or a straight mindfulness meditation practice, you can't drive people to a particular result. They're going to get there on their own. It also, for me, means that you need to bring in language that avoids authoritarian or spiritual tones if you don't know who you have in the room. I mean, one of my favorite grounding exercises is um, before a mindfulness practice or even coming out of one, is to the 5 4 3 2 1 technique. So five things you see, four things you touch, three things you hear, and so forth. Orient people to what's going on around them. They can use their breath as a point of anchoring or grounding. So all of those are practices that take into account people's needs for safety and choice and agency. And that agency piece is something I will always come back to.
Wow. I think this is something many of us miss or kind of ignore because uh, this is something which cannot be enforced upon or thrown upon. It's as you mentioned, it's all about giving that safe space, providing that safe space, and then it's a choice. You take your time. I'm just giving you the avenues, but it's who decide how to do it. So that really resonates with me, and I believe with all the listeners also.
Yeah, Sana, that's absolutely right. It's developing awareness, but doing it with safety and within the person's zone of comfort. And the
Yeah.
interesting thing is that once they realize that you are providing that safety, and as they develop more awareness, then that window expands. Um, and it's the window of tolerance, I think is what some people call it.
Mhm.
But you have to be aware of where that window is, how much it's opened, and not try to
Yeah.
jam it open. Just gradually,
Yeah.
it'll find its way to opening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, and also another one of your exemplary work is your breathwork coaching certification, Hans, in the prison system. It really sounds revolutionary. Can you explain what exactly? I mean, how does it work? And if you can share a story or maybe a moment that captures the impact of bringing these somatic tools into that space.
Yes, I mean, first with the boys, I need to get them to quickly understand the benefits, because they can listen to me talk and they'll they're skeptics, understandably.
Yeah.
Um, but letting them know that in fact they will perform better athletically, they will sleep better, they will feel calmer and more relaxed. And so it's at first showing them different breathing patterns and different breathing rates. Rather, for instance, box breathing, where you inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, and then hold again at the bottom for 4 seconds, or 4-7-8, which is 4 seconds inhale, 7 seconds hold, 8 seconds exhale. And just doing some simple breathing rates like that, they can
Mhm.
quickly see the benefits. And part of when they then see the benefits, then some of it is discussion about why should they care. And these are young men who, some of them, frankly, unfortunately, will probably never leave prison. Once they turn 18, they will go to an adult prison to serve out the remainder of whatever sentence. But a lot of them will be out in a few years. And my position to them is getting them to understand that they have taken from the community. And whether people believe it or not, my experience has been that when you get these kids to open up, they
Mhm.
feel shame and guilt
Mm.
about what they've done and how they have harmed their communities. And in providing, and it wasn't just breathwork certification, is breathwork coaching certification, because I wanted them to go out into the world as breathwork coaches, and then to be able to have something to offer
Yeah.
as kind of making amends, or as an offering and a show of a way of asking for forgiveness, but again, bringing a gift back to the communities that they had taken so much from, and just having that belief that they had something to offer. Because in these institutions, they're not necessarily being trained to offer anything back to the
Mm.
community, but this is a tool where that they could bring back, and they knew that. Um, and I showed them different research. I think Lynn McTaggart talks. I can't remember what she calls it, but it's if you get people in the room focused on the same loving thoughts, engaged in breath work together, that there's a certain level of energy that's heightened, not just in the room, but in the environment, in the outer space. And they were intrigued by that and wondering about it. And so what ended up happening is you would have a young man. I had a young man take me aside and say he couldn't tell anybody, but he was having tremendous lower back pains, and
Mhm.
he felt like a victim because of that. Because in those places you have to be tough, you have to be ready to fight. Um,
Yeah.
but that the pain in his back was leaving, nightmares were gone because he had constant nightmares from some of the things that he had done, and his wasn't the only story. They I We never got to the point where they would talk about it in groups, which I get, but they would take me aside and explain to me some of the benefits that they were receiving. And my only regret is because once they get out and because they're juveniles, I can't have contact with them. I don't know where they go. Those records aren't made available to me. Um,
Mhm.
but just wondering and hoping and praying that they would take those lessons out into the world. But I know while they were in, that this was that it was their carencia, as I had mentioned before. It was their place of safety, where if they were engaging in breath work in their cells at night, nothing could touch them. They wouldn't be haunted by their nightmares. And the sooner they were clearing that out of their nervous system, the sooner they were going to be able to become productive citizens, both in the institution, but more importantly, once they get out.
Absolutely. And I also believe that they they will be so effective to help um, society understand the power of these healing tools and practices, because sometimes there are a lot of misconceptions and all that woo woo stuff attached to
Yes,
this. But
yes.
if something is transforming the lives of all these young men out there, to give it back to the society, to contribute something which is meaningful and which has personally helped them get uplifted, then I think they'll be the best advocates for these tools.
That's right. And what I also hope is that, the tech bros or the masters of the universe adapt these practices as well. And I, kind of envision or have a fantasy about, people who are at the top of their game, as some people would judge it because of income and wealth, joining forces with young people who've had nothing, and them all breathing together, engaging in mindfulness practice together, engaging in body awareness together, and understanding that we're all going through something here on this planet, but gaining some type of common ground that currently is not readily apparent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So great. And Hans, before we wrap up, you have spoken about wanting to be an ancestor worth remembering. So, what does this mean to you? Especially in the context of the work you are doing.
I've worked with people in a variety of different realms who have had tremendous wealth. And
Mhm.
I often wonder, because some of them have passed from this realm, whether they thought as their last thought, you know what, I could have made more money on that deal. And my guess is now that wasn't the last thought. That often it's there are things of regret. And so, on the tombstone we have the year we were born and then the year we died, and in between is that dash. And that dash represents how we've lived in between those times. And breath work in many ways is symbolic, because it's the first thing that you do, and it's the last thing that you do. And so what happens in between that? And for me, if again, in generations, there are generations where I'm not going to be remembered. I get that. But I also believe in the butterfly effect, and energetic, and it's woo woo. I get it. But the energy that lives on once someone has made an impact. And so I'm constantly asking myself, literally every day, because it's part of my ritual, part of my habit. Uh, how do I want to be remembered? How do I, and that's on a daily basis. If I'm interacting with somebody, how do I
Mhm.
want them to remember me? But after I'm gone, how will people describe me? What lessons will they, have I made someone's life better? And I feel pretty good about my answers to those questions right now. And I intend to keep getting those same good answers, until I pass.
Yeah, yeah. And that's kind of, people may say, oh no, that is selfish. That is selfish. You're doing just because of that you want to have a legacy behind? I mean, do you get these kind of questions, Hans?
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. And frankly, Sana, you know what? I acknowledge that it is selfish, but it's selfish to me in a healthy way, because too much of my life has been spent doing for others and wondering, well, how are they thinking about me, as opposed to me saying, how do I feel about myself? Am I doing what's right in terms of my beliefs, both spiritually and otherwise? Um, and I've gotten closer to living out how I believe I should live. And yes, to a certain extent, that's selfish. But if you don't have that level of selfishness, then I think we tend to get batted back and forth between what society is asking of us, what social media is saying we should be. I used to regret that I was what I guess Barbara Shear called a multi-potentialite. There's another term for it, but I was, I realized that I didn't want to be locked in to one kind of identity. And to a certain extent, that's selfish too. And people have pointed it out. You were doing this and you should continue to do it. But my question was why? And who are you to tell me how I'm
Mm.
supposed to conduct myself? And I'm much more comfortable now with, you know, following my own North Star. And too many people get caught up in their identity. And when that identity gets harmed, because I work with a lot of women who are in midlife, and when they hit a certain period of life because of changes in their body or circumstances, they're empty nesters where their kids leave and their identity gets shifted. They've risen to the top in a corporate environment, but all of a sudden they realize they're being phased out because they've hit a certain age. And then so who are they now? And so, helping people find their identity, they realize that at that point, they're going to have to be a little selfish in terms of figuring that out for themselves and to figure out what's my purpose now.
Couldn't be a better answer than that. It's
Thank you.
beautiful. Beautiful. So, before we wrap up, if our listeners would like to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
I have a Substack at my name, hanshageman.substack.com or hanshagemancoaching.com.
Great. I'll make sure to have the links and details in the show notes. And Hans, thank you. Thank you so, so much for actually helping us understand that healing can actually ripple across generations. And I personally feel so inspired by the way you weave somatic practices with social justice and leadership, which is a rare and really powerful, beautiful combination.
Well, I want to thank you for holding that space for me, asking very sensitive, informed questions, and allowing me to just share what I hopefully people can find useful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your kind words, Hans, and to all of our listeners. I am very sure this conversation stirred something within you. So, if it did, sit with it for a moment, notice what's happening in your body, and breathe into that space. And remember that resilience isn't about pushing through; it's about softening into what helps you grow stronger. And with that, this is your host Sana signing off from the Mindful Living. Thank you.